And here's the results, the analysis results. So there's no effect of mild violations, the criticism intensity for the mild violations. And also there was zero effect for the moderate violations too. So, but we found this trend that for severe violations, people approve of stronger criticism, but it wasn't like large enough effect. So we were like kind of puzzled again at this point, because in study 1A, we found a strong norm against overblaming and very like almost non-effect, non-norm against underblaming. And in study 1B, we found this, like we didn't find anything, the norm against overblaming, the norm against underblaming. So we were thinking, oh, maybe we should change the way we address this question. The way we asked the question in the first two studies was we show them the violation, and then we already show the participants how the hypothetical offender's friend responded to the offender after they heard about the incident. So we thought that this is way too indirect measure of assessing, tapping into people's norm structure in their head. And it's not the case normally. When something bad happens around you, you just automatically make the judgment, and also think about a way how you could respond to that instead of taking this third-party perspective as if you're reading an article about the event in newspaper. And so in order to really help people imagine themselves being in this situation of having a friend who violates norm and how they would respond to their friend. In study 2, we changed this task. So, sorry, it's not like clear image, but so again, people read about a violation. In this case, Bob stole his cousin's brand new watch. And when Bob's friend heard about this, he walked up to Bob and took one of the following actions. And that asked participants to choose on their own which would be the most fitting response in this context. So if you were Bob's friend, how would you respond? So these are the verbs we use. So we broadened the range of the intensity of criticism this time from disapprove of, object to, blame, scold, shout, and lash out at. And then participants had to only choose one response in this list. Okay. And then this is raw, like average responses. Line graph, so it's kind of complicated, but if you just like see the pattern a little bit here, one thing that shows is that first of all, for mild violations, you see this negative linear trend, although it's like they're bumpy hills. And for the severe ones, the direction is opposite. And for the moderate violations, we see a little bit of like this shape that we think that these bumpy hills are due to the fact that we use these verbs and people tend to maybe distinguish the intensity of criticism, these verbs in a broader sense rather than refined way, fine-grained distinction. So maybe people are drawn to use disapprove of rather than object to if they have two choices. And then we did the analysis. So to keep things simple, from this point, I'll just focus on the severe violations and mild violations, so focusing on the norm against overblaming and the norm against underblaming. So here's the linear fit here. And for the mild violations, there's a very strong effect, 0.56, the linear trend, negative trend. And for the severe violations, that was also the case, but if you compare the beta values, the effect was a lot stronger for the mild violations, which shows, again, the pattern that we found in study 1A, that people have really strong norm against overblaming, and when they're really like pushed to the corner and then you have to choose the most fitting response, you have only one card to use and choose the best response, then they're like, okay, we have the norm against underblaming, but still in this context, they're more generous about underblaming compared to overblaming. Okay, is everything clear so far? Okay, thank you. And this is going to be the last study. So study 3, we thought about what would be a more realistic way of kind of looking into how people respond to violations. And when we checked the stimuli set in the study, we realized that some of the stimuli set, as you saw, are not just extremely severely bad behaviors, but also illegal behaviors. So if you see someone shooting someone and like here, like for example, that's not happened, but if that happened, I mean, that'll never happen, but in case ever they're like hypothetical situation, let's imagine like here. And then when you see that, you would not just walk up to the person like, I am very mad at you. We don't do that. We call the police or run away, of course. So we thought that maybe some of the questions, which is also interesting because in a lot of moral psychological literature, most of the time in the past, the stimuli set were composed of severely bad behaviors, which happen to be also illegal behaviors. So in study 3.1, we wanted to make it more natural, kind of capture the broader range of responses people might have when they see violating events. So first of all, also that applies for the really mild violations too. There's a lot of times if someone did something, especially unintentionally, you don't want to like walk up to the person every time and then I disapprove of your behavior for forgetting something. That's kind of mean too. So we wanted to make sure that people have the option of choosing say nothing at all, but also this could be applied to extremely bad behaviors too. If they want to say nothing to the transgressor and then run away, they could say this one. This is a good choice. And then we had chide, criticize, scold, let someone have it, lash out at, so varying intensity of criticism, and last, the contact the police option. And again, we changed the test because we wanted to really like throw a big net and then make sure that people feel like they had opportunity to express what they think is a good response to violations. We asked them to read about the violating behavior, about Bob stealing his cousin's brand new watch. And then we told participants when a friend learned about what Bob did, he had several options to respond to Bob's behavior. And then we asked them to drag and drop one of these responses into 3 different boxes, fitting, not fitting, I can't tell. And then only 2% of the entire responses belonged to I can't tell. So we just dropped the 2%. If you want to take a look at the really tiny bar graphs in the end, I can show you the slide. But we just dropped that part and then focus on the fitting and not fitting responses. And we calculate the proportion of choices that belongs to fitting category. Sorry. So let's first check out say nothing at all. So it seems like people often choose say nothing at all for severe violations too, but also obviously more for mild and moderate violations. And contact the police, you can see here that for severe violations, people chose that choice option as the fitting response. And a lot, almost really very little for the mild and moderate violations. And you can see this mild and moderate violations going down this trend that people, so this includes only chide, from chide to lash out at, and you can see this linear negative trend. But for the severe violations, even though we asked them the full option, we thought, people show this rather flat trend for severe violations. And the analysis results were as follows. So for the black one is mild. So black, the linear term of criticism intensity was very significant for mild violations, 0.52, the beta value. And for the severe violations, yes, it was p-value is below 0.05. But if you check out the beta value, it was only 0.06, which means the effect was really tiny, tenuous. So we can again come back to this image saying, yeah, there's very strong norm against over-blaming, but compared to that, we don't think that there's a strong norm against under-blaming. So in this figure, you can confirm that, yes, they both exist, but the relative strength supporting those two kinds of norms that we thought as two pillars of the norm of proportionality wasn't fully supported in this project. So to conclude, yes, participants increasingly endorsed intense moral criticism as the severity of norm violations increased, which is kind of a big relief to know that. And also, we found that people, at least who participated in this project, said that they have a strong norm against over-blaming than under-blaming. And this is like partial support for the normal proportionality. And in future research, okay, so what we thought based on this research, and I also had like a lab study that I attempted to work on while working with Professor Marley. We try to set up a study where participants cannot see the other person and they get a chance to directly send a note when the other person violates a norm, like cheating, telling a lie, versus they can talk about that incident with other participants. Again, it's like all anonymous, but in that study we had like around like 30 participants and almost to zero, only like two participants chose to send the note directly to the transgressor, even though they don't know who sent the note. So it was just consistent with people kind of avoiding direct confrontation. And that's why we thought that what would be the context that people would be more comfortable with kind of saying like you should be blamed more and then this was way too weak. Maybe that's the time when people ask help from the legal system, and also the projects that we are hoping to work on with, like in collaboration with researchers here, maybe we could ask the AI system or robots like algorithms to make the judgment and like this is the amount of criticism that this person has to receive because like this was the severity of violation, and then how people would think about it. Would people say like still like no, that is too much, that's kind of inappropriate, or they might be saying like yes, that's what we hoped for, finally you're gonna do it for us. So that's a future question I would love to address with my collaborators. So this is all I wanted to share with you today, and thank you for listening. If you have any questions, let me know. Thank you. Oh, we are in the process of writing up this paper, so if you have any suggestions, that would be even more greatly appreciated. Okay, Tom.
So I've got first of all, great talk.
Thank you.
Yeah, really interesting. I have two questions. I'll do like an external question and an internal question. So
Okay.
The external question is, so for us, as we are trying to design robots that give the right amount of moral criticism, right? So from this, I would look at this and say, okay, well, in this circumstance, my robot shouldn't lash out, right? Because you're looking at these verbs of moral criticism.
Yeah.
But how do you actually determine what counts as lashing out, right? When you're going from these sort of verbs of moral criticism to the actual prosodic and semantic aspects of the sentences, what's the relationship there? And that just to the internal question, which you can then answer separately, is when you were asking people to choose the best of those options, did you consider asking them to rank them instead? And why or why not?
Oh, I see. So to answer the first question, I think this is, I like it that in this project we borrowed this verbs of moral criticism as a novel way to kind of explore how to measure intensity of moral criticism. But at the same time, just like any other DVs, or like IV, independent variables, or like stimuli set, it's not the all cure kind of stimuli set. So I personally agree that that's a potential limitation, that some verbs have like unique connotation. Lash out, you don't like, if someone lashes out, it's considered like kind of it's looked down on in normal cases. But I would like to emphasize that we had this past research making sure that they control for the intensity. And then participants were capable of measuring, assessing the intensity of these verbs. And also, we ran like pre-test, post-test to make sure that that's the case. But that's also interesting because lash out, if that has like a negative connotation, that means that it might be considered as even stronger criticism, which we wanted to realize in this project. We wanted to have like a really strong verbs that could capture extreme cases of responses. So I agree with you with the limitation.
To be clear, I wasn't saying it was a limitation. I was just saying, practically speaking, how do you then determine whether something counts as lashing out versus or chiding or etc.?
I think, okay, that's a separate question, I think. Thank you. So, but I think that's limitation of this like choice, because, but at the same time, lash out at, I think if robot is an agent that lashes out at human agent, I personally think the lashing out has to have some kind of relationship. You have the expectation that this entity is not going to lash out at you and they have more respect for you. So maybe in robots' case, people might actually consider it as like objective, like intense criticism. And but do you really want to have a robot that lashes out at you? Like when the robot is trying to help you out with making a better moral decisions, do you want to create a robot? Would it be necessary to have a robot that lashes out at you? I don't know whether it's effective. Either people would just consider it as an objectively really strong response, or like, how dare you, robot, like you're so mean. So I am not, practically speaking, I'm not sure, we can talk about it later more, but I'm not sure whether it's gonna be like reasonable to have that kind of robot. Yeah, but it's an interesting idea to think about, and how people would respond to lashing out at, like, robot that lashes out at you. Yeah, and the second question, we actually thought about that, ranking the order of the criticism, the responses.
Did you just make the analysis too complicated, or?
Yeah, that was the reason. Yeah, but also, I think we wanted to start from like categorization, but that was one of the ideas we considered, but didn't execute the idea. Okay. But that's a good idea, actually. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
So this is very interesting talk. Thank you very much, Boyan.
Thank you.
So I was wondering about sort of like connection between a human blame versus human robot blame. Blame that happens between human robot. I think the human robot, the role of the robot currently plays often probably will add more complexity to a study, as you were mentioning that the role the robot often plays, right? Sometimes it can be because when you have like two humans, they can be like at the same level, right? They're not so much different, but you have a robot. You often assign more power to the robot, so that robot actually, or the robot often assumes much lower status, right? So that actually, then I have a question about your study. Is that did you actually look at the kind of power distance between the two people, right? The blame versus people who is blaming. Because I'm thinking also another interesting thing that I was curious about who the major participants were, their backgrounds. Were they from the homogeneous cultural background or from different cultural backgrounds?
Oh yeah, thank you. That's the first question. So it was about whether we, in this project, measured how people naturally perceived power differences after being engaged in this task. So we didn't have that question in our study, unfortunately, which is a really great idea if we had done it. But luckily, in the original paper where we had this development of verbs of moral criticism, those researchers looked into the power difference. So they showed these verbs to participants and asked them to kind of guess the top power difference. That's what I remember. I may be wrong, but that's my understanding. They also had those, like one of those things to measure in those verb perception. But it would be interesting how people would, so a robot that scolds you solemnly, would human agents, participants, like look up to the robot as like the holy grail of morality, ethics, or maybe like, like that you're annoying. That's something that I would love to delve into and then do research in the future. And the second question, what was it? I forgot.
It's about the cultural background.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so these are all MTurk studies. So we had the vast majority of ethnicity was Caucasian, white, and like half male, half female. So that's like and all participants were recruited from the US. So it's, in a sense, homogeneous, but if they're from different states, obviously we have very diverse cultures in this country. So, but we didn't actually measure those like for like cultural background. Yeah, but that's an interesting idea we could explore in the future. Yes. Oh, I think he was first. And then,
I don't have a question. Okay.
What's your name?
No.
Noah? Could you go ahead?
So, one thing that occurred to me while you were showing some of your examples is, how do you deal with the idea that people may interpret the situation in very different ways, depending on their own perceptions and biases? For instance, with the example of the man who kidnapped a child for ransom and then strangled them anyway, my immediate first thought was, how do we know that their friend isn't helping them in the business of kidnapping for ransom, and he's just annoyed that they have the police on him.
That's dark.
Which makes me think, well, there's a very... We now have the same situation,
Okay.
and two, depending on the status of the friend in relation to what was going on,
Yeah.
two very different levels of response, in which the violation is actually the same, but I should say, ultimately the situation suddenly becomes a lot more
Yeah,
complicated.
exactly.
You can see that suddenly almost the entire spectrum of responses is valid depending on a piece of information that wasn't given to you.
That's interesting. Yeah.
So what do you do then?
That's very creative idea, and I think that's dark but very plausible, not impossible situation, because participants might think that they're accomplices and then this person is helping out this person, so I'm going to choose objective, which is like a lowest possible like response. Okay, you did a great job, like you took the kidnapped the child successfully, good job. Maybe that's like, because we didn't have the police in that situation, but hopefully that's like a subpopulation in the participants pool that I sampled. I hope so. I mean, that's the world I want to live in. But also, I cannot answer that question, unfortunately, because we didn't measure that in this project. But it would be interesting if you're interested in exploring that idea. I think it would be cool to look into these hopefully subpopulation in the study, and then why they think that like that, and how their moral responses would change. Yeah, I don't have data to support that, but yeah. That's like basically I'm writing a novel here, sorry. Yeah, Kate.
So I have a question about the rhetoric of the verbs that you actually chose to use. So did you use another paper to determine these verbs? So the question I have is we talked a little bit about how rhetorically things can be reciprocal or what they mean as far as power imbalance. But if this is taken to a different culture, not necessarily American language, how would you then form research?
So how?
Because the translations may not mean the same thing, right?
Yeah.
And so
we might not be able to find the exact same like words, vocabularies in a different language, but I think still if the researchers over there are interested in, they could borrow the broad concept and look into their own dictionaries. I'm Korean, so I would look into Korean, look up Korean dictionary and try to find synonyms for blame, and then following the same steps that the previous researchers who developed that stimuli, and then do the same, and then come up with Korean word, verb of moral criticism. And I think that's the only way, but if we want to compare those two things, we would have to have bilingual participants to make those comparisons, back and forth, translation forever. But I think it's doable, which is kind of cool if you want to look into cross-cultural differences, because that's really a wonderful idea. I love cross-cultural studies, so that'll be really nice to do that. And also, I wanted to add one more thing. I think you captured something important to know, because another limitation I would like to admit is that the stimulus that we use in this project are all one-sentence behavior. So we could have come up with more we could have come up with a richer story and give them the entire story before they make judgments. But in this way, we wanted to have multiple behaviors, because in the moral psychological literature, oftentimes more researchers have been using a few set of stimuli set, 5 stories, and then test their ideas. But we wanted to have a variety, because the important part of this goal of this project to have the broad range of violation severities, not just really small range. So that was downside and strength at the same time of this project. Yeah. Anyone else? Yes, please.
So how much of this work is descriptive? How much do people blame versus prescriptive? How much should?
I see. In this project, I think it's mixed, because we didn't specifically ask participants how would most people respond versus how people should behave. We didn't use that phrase, so we cannot clarify that. But because of that, I think people had people used mixed definitions of social norms, both injunctive and descriptive norms in making these judgments. But I think what would be the appropriate response, especially like the first two studies, I may be wrong because I don't have data again to support that, but like I think people might have been more influenced by injunctive norms, what you should do, like what would be the appropriate response.
But this is what the participant thinks.
That's how I interpret the test if I were a participant, but we didn't measure that. But yeah, it's a cool idea. Yeah, I didn't think about it, like based on, but like oftentimes they're I think mixed, because like descriptive norms and injunctive norms, I think a lot of times mixed, and that if we were to really separate those two notions out and then manipulate those like separately, it could happen. But in these cases, because we are assessing just lay people's concepts of how one should express criticism to another person. Yeah, but we didn't look into that, so that'll be my answer, short answer. Thank you.
So you said that you collected information on participant gender. Did you find any gendered differences in the results?
I didn't look into the gender difference, but there was one study, the most fitting response task. We actually had the female version and male version, so we wanted to see whether female, the responder and the transgressor are both like same gender, female, or male, and then we saw how participants interpreted. Oh, and then in this scenario, I think the participants were asked to imagine themselves as the offender in the scenario, and the responder, the person who expresses criticism, was the same gendered person. And we saw this a slight trend that female participants tend to be more avoidant of stronger criticism compared to male participants. But that was just a single study, so I'm not quite sure whether it's fair to generalize that result to all the population or to other studies too, because that was only one study. But yeah, I haven't done analysis on gender effect, but I should look into that actually, because you're writing up the paper right now, so it'll be nice to do that now than later. Yeah, thank you. Yes?
So,
Gender.
following up on the question that Noah asked and your comments on that, it's just about context in general.
Uh-huh.
So maybe there are better answers in past literature here, but it seems like the lower the range of the moral transgression, the more people might need context to make a judgment. So if you simply told a white lie or you stole a watch, you can imagine a whole range of circumstances in which that might be forgivable and thus be reluctant to overblame. Whereas if somebody murdered somebody might come up with extenuating circumstances, but there's a smaller range. And I was wondering if maybe if there's other literature that goes towards this underblaming and overblaming effect, then this question might be irrelevant. But in the context of your study, it feels like that might explain some of what you're seeing.
I see. Yeah, that's a great possibility. I mean, so people. That's why we have like we might have broader range of responses for mild violations. And then people are more willing to give the benefit of doubt, basically, to the
simply having enough doubt that they don't feel.
Yeah.
It's hard to make a strong judgment.
Yeah, you feel like it's not justified to like choose this intense criticism. Yeah, I think that's totally plausible, and which is nice. People giving benefit of doubt to other people when they hear about those people doing bad things. It's nice if that's the case. It would be nice to have findings supporting that. And then, yeah, I would think that there should be some research on that, I think. Yeah, actually Bertram, my advisor, like grad school advisor, did a lot of work on manipulating the extenuating reasons and manipulating the intentionality of violations, intentional, unintentional. So some of his work might be able to answer your question. Yeah, thank you. Oh, I think you're done. You're done. Okay.
I just want to quick clarify, the point of the research was to kind of see how people react in situations so that this could be future used to program or adjust how robots act in our world, right?
Yeah, that'll be like a future path that I hope that's gonna happen if all of you help, because you're good at like engineering and right. Yeah, that's my understanding.
Putting this further,
Yeah.
is there like a basis for like what kind of robots or which kind of like scenarios these robots would be functioning in? Like there's like things right now about like police robots like monitoring like parking tickets and stuff like that. Or are we truly just talking like AI
Interpersonal.
systems and stuff?
No, I see.
So what is the implication of this research to the robots?
This is like, yeah, okay. This shows that your expertise, I think. Yeah, because I didn't think about this issue in that perspective that deeply. Yeah, thank you. I think, not a researcher Boyoung, but as a ordinary layperson Boyoung, I would like to have all kinds of robots being tested and then see if in any kind of situations having robots replacing humans, like expressing, like giving sanctions would be effective or not. And I don't think I have the expertise to do that, and I believe you have that expertise, that knowledge and skills and capacities. And it would be cool if everyone gets like individual different kinds of robot, and then see in which situation this kind of robot works the best or not. Yeah, so that's my answer. Yeah, but I personally think that it could be applied to many contexts and many kinds of robots, but that's something we should explore in the future together, hopefully. Yeah, is that, I don't know. Yeah, that's my answer. Is that okay? Okay, thank you. Yeah, Tom?
Just as a comment there, I think that it might not be as much about context as it is about capability. If you have robots that have natural language capability, then it doesn't matter what context they're in. It could be in any sort of context, and there could be people in that context who are, saying things that are inappropriate, right? It could have nothing to do with that context, right? You could be in, a factory context, and somebody says something that's discriminatory, right? It has nothing to do with the factory work. It's just something they're saying. If you have the robot in that context that has natural language capabilities, then it's their capability that dictates the need to respond and issue moral criticism, regardless of whatever underlying context in which that violating behavior was issued.
But I think let me know if I understood your question wrongly. I thought that he was wondering about how people would interpret robots, even if it has a full capacity to speak like humans, like whether people would be willing to accept that robot being around, like giving parking tickets versus like, hey, you're so mean, you forgot my birthday, kind of. Yeah, they're very different contexts. And maybe some robots might work, maybe more human-like robot would be more appropriate for the latter situation. I mean, that was my understanding. Let me know if I misunderstood.
I think maybe kind of a combination.
I see, okay.
It is more so like, if they're like police robots, I feel like there might be a social expectation for them to
Yeah.
criticize you for something wrong. But if it's just like a robot that is developing a car, are we expecting something that's purely built just to manufacture something? Are we expecting them to have moral obligations?
I see.
Well, if they're communicating through language, then maybe, right?
Yeah.
If they're really able to communicate through language, with enough flexibility that they're able to issue moral criticism.
They're your colleagues and
Yeah.
I would just like to say, I would argue that I don't know if there would be a point in giving a car-making robot enough language capacity for moral criticism. You'd probably be better off reinvesting that into either making another one of the robots or improving one of its other capabilities. And also, I would argue, especially in the context of dangerous factory work, I don't know if you would want a robot that is involved in the dangerous task of welding car parts together to be distracted and say, hey, that's wrong, pausing in its welding job.
I would argue that the more dangerous the work, the more critical it becomes to enforce the norms surrounding that work. Because now some of those norms can be a safety issue. Hey, don't do a dangerous thing. I'm a robot enforcing an important norm.
I would also argue that there's also a norm that it probably should complete its task. Yeah, I think we're getting
I think those are mutually exclusive.
Yeah, so you could have it finish welding the car part and then
Yeah. Oh, I think.
off task here.
Okay, I'll be off.
Any other questions? All right, let's make our
Yay!
speaker.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Oh, really? Thank you.
To ask a question. I'm just curious. So, what's the human's expectation within the robots where there's norms? They have a